everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden in Spokane, Washington, where the hardiness zone ranges from 5B to 6A. You know, I get asked a lot of questions about drip irrigation because that's how we water our vegetable garden. So I thought that would be a perfect topic for today. I'm going to show you 4 different setups that we use based on the types of vegetables that we're growing. So I'll show you the whole setup, and we've got a lot of material to cover, so let's get started. I should probably clarify my attire for today because here we are on June 18th, it's in the 40s, and there's a breeze blowing, so it is freezing out here. And I should also add that on June 16th, 2 days ago, we had a frost. This has been the weirdest garden season yet. And we keep going back and forth between warm temperatures and lots of cold temperatures. Fortunately, everything is fine. We covered all of the tender crops, and so the plants are doing all right. Phew! It is so important for all of us to conserve water, and I feel that a drip irrigation system is a great place to start. That's because it waters right down at the soil surface rather than up the plants. So you have far less evaporation than you would with an overhead sprinkler system, for example. Now, we've been forecasted to have a very hot and dry summer, and I feel that the way our system is set up will be able to give just the right amount of water to our plants so that they'll thrive. The other thing I wanted to mention that's very important is that when you water a garden, you want to water the soil, not the plant's leaves. That's because the roots down in the soil are what take up that moisture and deliver it to the plants. So water the soil, not the plants. We have a well rather than being connected to the city's water system, and the well is right here. And from it goes a 1-inch black poly pipe that is down in the soil below the frost line. So it goes from here to here. That black poly sprinkler pipe that went all the way from the well to the garden ends up in a sprinkler valve box. And Bill has set up a timer that is connected to it so that the water will run at certain times of day. Now, before the water ends up going to all of our little drip irrigation setups, it goes through another box that contains a pressure reducing valve, because with a drip irrigation system you don't want that full water pressure that you have for the rest of your house and your landscape. And it also goes through a pre-filter that filters out any types of minerals or particles because you don't want it clogging up your lines. Now, before I show you the specific setups, I thought I should give you a quick overview of our garden layout. So in this main part of the garden here, we have 21 raised beds for growing vegetables in. They are 3 feet wide by 8 feet long. And then on the side here, there are 2 beds that have raspberries growing in them. There's also some cloth grow bags where we're growing potatoes. There are large containers at the end of this row that Bill is growing some grape tomatoes in. And then we have a separate area that we added a few years ago to the south. You can see them off in the distance. There are 4 raised beds there. Each of them are 4 feet wide, and they range from 8 to 16 feet long. There's also a large bed on the south side of our greenhouse. So yeah, we have a lot of areas to cover with our drip irrigation system. And because we initially only had this area, I say only, and I realize it's a big garden, but we set up a drip system that covers this whole area. And then when we added in the south side beds, we set up a separate drip irrigation system. So I'll talk about that some more in a little bit. We initially went with soaker hoses because that was pretty inexpensive back then. The problem was that over time they kept getting clogged with minerals. I would suddenly notice that some plants were struggling and then realize they just weren't getting the water. So that was a repeat problem for us. We'd use a special needle and poke in some new holes, but then the hoses would shoot out more water than we wanted. So we switched to a regular drip irrigation system after that. So now what I want to do is give you a general idea of how the drip irrigation system is getting water to the beds, and then we'll get into the specific setups. So underneath me there is a black poly sprinkler pipe that is underground. It comes from the sprinkler valve box and it's running along this end of this row of raised beds. Now, when that black poly pipe reaches the middle of the end of a raised bed, we have a special setup in order to bring the water up to the top of the raised bed. So I'll show you a diagram of this that Bill drew up years ago, but the black poly sprinkler pipe stops here, and underneath the soil surface there is a T-fitting, that's a PVC fitting. This is a PVC riser, and we have clamped it onto the end of the bed so that it doesn't get damaged or bumped. Then there is a PVC elbow that connect to a little valve so we can control the water flow to the top of the bed, and then the actual drip irrigation system. So what will happen is then the black poly pipe starts up again, and when it hits the middle of the next bed, this same setup is bringing the water system up to the surface of the raised bed. So here's Bill's diagram. Here's the 1-inch black poly sprinkler pipe coming into the garden. This is the sprinkler valve box. And then it goes down one of the rows of raised beds. And when it gets to the middle of an end of a raised bed, I'm going to jump over here for a side view. So there's either a T fitting like this or a 90-degree fitting depending upon where it is in the row. And then here is the 1/2-inch PVC riser, the 90-degree PVC elbow, and then a ball valve which then connects to the drip lines, etc. So if we go back, here's what I just showed you. Then the black poly pipe continues. Here is the next setup, this here, and then the black poly pipe continues, and here is the same setup. So I hope that makes more sense. The only thing that's different about that setup when we hit the end of a row is instead of having a T-fitting, which would allow us to keep going this way with that black poly sprinkler pipe, is we have an elbow down there because this is the end of this part of the line. I mentioned how many years ago we added in a southern portion of our vegetable garden. And when you look at this photo, you can see how Bill has dug the trenches, he's got the water line in there and so on. And it's basically the same concept, but I just wanted to show you how he set up those beds. So here is the PVC riser that's coming up. You can see it's been clamped to the end of the bed. Here's the PVC elbow. Here's a little bit different style of valve. And then to it is attached the manifold with the drip lines off of it. I also wanted to mention that you can completely disregard these upright PVC pipes that we have clamped to the sides of all of our raised beds. They're just a support structure for any hoops I want to use in case I'm growing a crop that needs insect protection, and the hoops will support floating row cover or agricultural insect netting. So these have nothing to do with the drip irrigation system. Okay, now I can show you specific applications that we use in our garden based on what we're growing in the bed. And that's the beauty of drip irrigation, is that there are so many different ways you can set things up to customize the way the water is delivered to the plants. Okay, you'll notice there's a valve on this bed, and this helps control the amount of water going out to the system, or we can completely turn it off at the end of the season. It has a manifold, that's this cross piece here, and then we use a special punch tool to attach lines of drip tape. That's what this stuff is with the blue lines on it. It has areas that the water weeps through, spaced at 8-inch intervals. This is run this morning already, and you can see where the water is. We've found that this type of setup works really well for growing things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, melons, and corn. This is our corn bed that's on the south side of our greenhouse, and it has the basic setup with just one small difference, and that is that because we have 5 rows of corn, we have 5 rows of drip tape. The drip tape that we bought is 15 mil, and it has an 8-inch emitter spacing. We have found that there are certain types of vegetable crops that seem to need a bit more water than what our basic setup provides. And I'm talking about things like lettuce, spinach, pak choi, pole beans. This bed already has the basic setup on it, but I want to show you what Bill did to give these plants more water. This is a little hard to see what with this lettuce plant being in the way, but what Bill did is he used the punch tool to add in a line of 1/4 inch tubing. It has a valve attached to it so I can turn it off completely or adjust the amount of flow. And then he attached micro misters that are on a stake, and there's 3 of them. That way the full area in this bed gets covered by water, and the plants grow great as a result. This is probably a little bit harder to see, but in a few of our beds we're using 1/4 inch soaker drip line. It has pre-installed emitters at a 6-inch spacing, although you can buy other spacings if needed. And we've been using this setup in wider raised beds where we're growing more rows of plants such as onions and shallots in this case. This next type of setup is what we use for growing veggies in containers. For example, we're growing potatoes in these 5 cloth grow bags and grape tomatoes in the 5 large pots in the distance. So how do you get the water from the top of the bed over to the grow bags or pots? Simple. So if you look at the manifold on this bed, you'll notice that Bill has added some 1/4 inch tubing to get water to each of the containers, and then he added a 6-foot piece of emitter tubing for each. This brown stuff is the emitter tubing, and he's coiled it around the base of the plant so that it gets plenty of water. One of the things I love about our drip system is that all of the setups for each bed are interchangeable. I just unscrew it here and move it to another bed as needed. So how long do we run our drip irrigation system? Well, right now we're running it for 20 minutes in the morning. When it gets a little bit warmer, we'll also run it for another 20 minutes in the afternoon. And when it gets super hot, we'll probably bump those numbers up. Now there's 2 really important things I want to emphasize. First of all, it's so important to monitor how your plants are doing to make sure they are getting enough water and not too much water. And then the other thing is that, everybody's soil is a little different and absorbs water differently. So again, keep an eye on your plants. You might need to run yours for longer than we do or for less time than we do. One thing I'm frequently asked by folks is what we do with our drip irrigation setup during the winter months, because we have a very cold winter, and I know a lot of you do too. The nice thing is that we can leave all of this out year-round. So in the fall, when Bill is ready to blow out the sprinklers from the rest of our landscape He comes in here and makes sure all of the valves are open, because remember I said sometimes we might have closed one. And then he unscrews this setup from the valve and just lays it right in place in the bed. And then he blows the air out of the lines, and that is all we have to do, which is awesome. So where do you get supplies for a drip irrigation system? Well, local is always best, so check with your local sprinkler supply company. Check with your local home center for parts. And then there's an online source that we have found to be incredibly helpful, and that is dripworks.com. They have every part that you could possibly imagine. And no matter what, always ask lots of questions to make sure that you're setting up a system that works best for your garden. I hope you found this video helpful and that I answered every question you can think of. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.